McKinney Vento, in case you weren't aware, has been around since 1987. It first passed as law in 1987 to address homeless issues across the whole spectrum of homelessness in the United States. It was amended 4 different times in the early 90s, and during one of those changes in the early 90s is when they put in Title VII, which works on or directly impacts schools, and that's where we're here to talk about today, is the Title VII piece of McKinney Vento. So McKinney Vento, when you were looking at the Homeless Act and how it provides assistance to children and youth, is that it ensures immediate enrollment and educational stability for children that we have identified as homeless. And then they've worked really hard in this law to define what homeless is. So homeless is a child who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Those are the 3 words you're going to hear a lot when you guys begin having conversations about students you may think are homeless, or they put something on that McKinney Vento form that you all have them fill out at the beginning of the year. So what is it to mean to have a lack of a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence? Well, they might be sharing houses with somebody else because of lack of housing. They've lost their houses, they were evicted, they don't have any money, ran out of money, or some other reason like that. So they moved in with a friend, a grandmother, another relative, so due to one of those causes. They might also be living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, campgrounds, due to a lack of alternative adequate accommodations, or they might even be living in a shelter of some sort. In addition, they could be living in a public or private place not designed ordinarily for use as a regular place to sleep. In the law, it actually defines this as a park bench in parentheses. They might be living in cars, public places, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings, and it is also designed to help migratory children living in any of the above circumstances. For those of you that are secondary, and sometimes this happens in elementary as well, the law also defines what an unaccompanied youth is, and an unaccompanied youth includes a child that is not in physical custody of a parent or guardian. So all of those circumstances will help us define a student that might be classified as homeless. There was an amendment that was made to this. Used to be students in foster care that were awaiting placement or any stage of that were covered under the McKinney Vento, but they've amended that, and now those children are covered under a different umbrella, and if you have any of those children, a foster child that comes into your care that looks like they're being placed by DCS, please feel free to give Denise or me a call, and we can help work through some of those issues as well. They're not McKinney Vento, but we can help with that as well. So what happens, according to the law, when somebody presents that does meet the definition of homeless, is that we must enroll, and we must enroll immediately, even if they do not have all of the documents that we typically require when students come to your building to enroll. So if they don't have proof of residency, if they don't have their birth certificate, if they don't have their immunization, if they're declaring homeless, we must enroll immediately, and then our assistant, Jennifer Dreiss, will work with you and your liaison, your school liaison, to make sure that we get the documentation that we need eventually, which would be primarily going right back to that school they just came from to see how much documentation they have. So what are the steps when someone presents? Actually, no, this is even before that. The very first thing you're going to do, and for those of you that have forgotten, you're going to want to start getting those copies made. The McKinney Vento form has to go home with every child at the beginning of the school year. It has to be paper. It's not going to be in that Skyward Online. So at some point during that first week, you're going to want to send that McKinney Vento form home with every single student. As those are coming in, you're going to want your attendance secretary or whoever collects those forms to be monitoring that part A where they answer yes or no to those 2 questions, and we'll look at a form in just a second that shows that. And anybody that's checked yes in that part A, you need to pull from that stack, and then we need to have conversations about that student and their family. The forms, once you've got all the paperwork or got it together, needs to be sent to the central office. You send that to Jennifer Dreiss. She will then work with the school liaison to make sure you guys are starting to gather all the information you need. Then she runs it through our district liaison, Ms. Goodwin, who will then make the determination whether or not this student is classified as homeless or not. And once that classification has been made, Jennifer Dreiss will coordinate with the school liaison and let them know whether or not they met the criteria. They'll send the letter. She'll also update it in Skyward. And then at the school level, your role would be to make sure that you provide that letter to the family and that you begin helping with things like getting them the free and reduced lunch, transportation, social worker, and the nurse. Some of this Jennifer will work with you on. Some of it we'll ask you to do. But let's talk about the form first. A lot of times what happens is if anybody checks yes on the form, it just gets sent up to us, and if it's not filled out completely, then we have to start back over, and then you all have to go back and meet with the family. So as you're collecting these, or your attendance secretary is collecting these, if you see a yes, have them get your McKinney Vento liaison involved, and you can work through the rest. You have to have both question 1 and 2 in section A noted, and then we're also looking for that description. If they wrote yes to either one of those, we'd like to know the information. Why are you living with grandma? If it's because you lost your job or you were evicted, you know, what were the circumstances? And this is where it gets, and you'll see in a slide a little later, where it gets kind of tricky because some of this information can be really confidential and it can be uncomfortable for them to talk about. So I'm hoping that whoever your school liaison is understands the nature of that and says, hey, I noticed that you checked that. Will you come back with me to my office so we can chat about some of what I've seen on here? And that way you give them a confidential, private place to begin to have conversations and finish filling out the form so that they understand we're not just gathering it to be nosy, but we really just need the information to be able to put services in place to provide supports for you and your family. Then section B, they complete section B if they checked yes to the questions in section A. So please make sure that they've looked at section B and they've annotated that, and then we do need a signature and a date and their relationship to the child in that section C. So this one is an example of what not to do, and Jennifer put a picture of one in there of what it should look like if it's all filled in and done correctly. So that's, you can see all 3 sections are filled out, it's dated, and signed by Mom. So what does the McKinney Vento Act do for our students once we've identified them as a student that is homeless that might need additional services? Is first one is that school stability, is they get to have access to a free appropriate education in a school that's convenient for them. And we enroll them immediately regardless of whether or not we have all the documentation. The other things that we can provide for them based on what they present with are things like transportation assistance. If they lose their house and they're in the Brentwood zone and now they're living in the Spring Hill zone, based on McKinney Vento, we can bus them to their current zone. So there are things that we can work through. Jennifer Dreiss is fabulous at working with you on that and working with transportation to help with some of our kiddos that really need this assistance. We also will work to get them free and reduced meals, as well as exempt them from their school fees, and making sure that they have educational services comparable to all the other students in the building. There is a note down here that the McKinney Vento Act does not provide housing, but I can tell you that once you get a student in the works and within this process, that your social worker, and that'll be the next slide I believe, you're going to want to do a referral to your social worker, and the social worker will work really hard to help them make sure that they get all the resources they need, and sometimes that means that they use our community resources to help get appropriate housing. So the first thing you need to remember, or one of the things you need to remember, is as soon as the student is designated as homeless according to McKinney Vento, is to do that referral to your social worker so that we can, again, work to meet the needs of the family. You're also going to want to work with your school counselor and other resources if they need school supplies, if they need tutoring, if they need clothing. There are options available. Jennifer can work with you through that, as well as your social worker can help work through all of those with you. If you need anything, Jennifer is amazing at what she does. If you've not ever met her, she's just kind of that quiet, silent one that works in the back and gets through all the nitty-gritty details. So please write down her extension or just email her. She'll be glad to help in any way she can. Again, just a reminder that these are tough conversations for a family that might find themselves in a position where they no longer have a residence or a place to live. So just being mindful of that and making sure that those conversations are happening in a place where their dignity can remain intact. And for our secondary folks, I think you all have a bigger task in that you need to keep your ear out and your eyes out for those kiddos that start couch surfing. I've only been helping with this for a year up at Central Office with Denise, and it seems like January is when we start seeing a lot of that happening, where something goes sideways at home and a kid is kicked out or something else happens, and they end up moving from house to house and sleeping wherever they can. So have your ears open, your eyes open, paying attention to those signs, and if you get an inkling that a student is doing that, make sure that you pull them aside again in that confidential conversation, give them a McKinney Vento form, and see if we can't get them some assistance. Some reminders for you. Once again, please remember those forms have to go home at the beginning of every single year, so please send that form home as soon as those babies come back. And then the second one, and this one is always the fun one, is please make sure you maintain all of your McKinney Vento forms on file for 7 years, and that's just a separate file. Please don't put those McKinney Vento forms in their CUME folders. Here are your contacts. Denise is your district liaison. Jennifer Dreiss is the McKinney Vento assistant. Brent and I are also here to help in any way should you have questions about McKinney Vento.